Hello my fellow freedom builders and welcome back to the channel. It's time for a new video, and today we're going to have a look at a topic that is making the markets a bit nervous right now. There's a lot of talk about the so-called debt ceiling in the United States, and there is a date mentioned that is the 1st of June. Now today I'm going to have a quick look at what this means, what's the history behind it. Is the debt problem in the United States really that bad as it sounds? And finally, I'll have a look at both why this could be a huge problem in the near future and, which is more important to you, I guess, what you could invest in if you want to profit from this entire situation. Now, first of all, let me have a quick look at this. Now, in the BBC.com here, Janet Yellen warns US could run out of cash by 1st of June. You might ask yourself, how could that come? United States can print their own money. They are the world's reserve currency. How can they run out of cash? Now, the thing is with the United States that back in 1917, during the First World War, they made a rule that there should be a debt ceiling, meaning they could, the politicians could not just take on a massive amount of debt. So when they hit that ceiling, they would have to renegotiate it or changing the budget, or so they were spending less. Now, what is happening right now is that United States, with their $31.4 trillion in debt, are hitting the debt ceiling. Well, they did that already in January, but Janet Yellen and her co-workers made some changes, and they have some extra boxes with money laying around that they can take a bit out of, I guess. So it hasn't been a real problem up until now. The politicians thought they had time to sometimes in August, but right now we have a date called 1st of June, meaning that with all the time it takes to get some new legislation in place, they have around 7 or 8 working days to get this problem solved. Now let's have a quick look at the history. Has this happened before? Has the debt ceiling been hiked up before? And yes, it has, just a few times, as you can see. This is back from 1940, and then on a regular basis they have raised the debt ceiling. And the last time they did that was in 21, you can see here, and it has basically happened during all political leaderships, both as presidents, Senate, with Republicans and Democrats leading the Senate and the House. So there's not really any political party here that are better or worse than the other. They have all raised the ceiling, so them complaining about right now, the Republican complaining about the Democrats wanting to raise the ceiling, well, that is a bit hypocritical because they have done the exact same thing. Now, let's have a look at the debt in the United States first. The debt, as you can see here in the US debt clock, it can look a bit negative, I'll give you that. This is the US national debt. It is up, it's inching close to $32 trillion here. You can see it per citizens and so on and so forth. And that is, of course, a bit of a bleak look here. However, we can't just look at the US national debt. We also have to look at what kind of economic growth there is in society, because we have, at least for now, positive GDP growth, meaning that more and more wealth is created in the US society. And we also have, if we look at this from Fred, we can see here the gross federal debt as a percent of gross domestic product. There's also inflation that makes the money worth less and less. So owing $32.4 trillion now will not be the same next year, and it's not the same as last year because the inflation is making the money worth less and less. So what you can actually see here is that the gross federal debt as a percentage of GDP has gone up, and has gone up massively since back in the 80s. However, it peaked, it was at just above 100% here, leading up to the virus crisis. Then it peaked at around 128%, and since then it has actually dropped Now, around 120% is still a massive number. You can see the same number here, 120.34% here. It's still a massive number, but it is slowly inching in the right direction. If we look at the federal deficit as a percentage of gross domestic product, that is also important to have a look at. Then you can see that it has been, with the virus crisis here, very low. At almost 15% of GDP was their national deficit. However, again, it has been inching upwards, and it is, quote unquote, only at 5.5% now, meaning that what they are losing, basically, if they were a business and their revenue was $1 million in a year, they would be losing $55,000 out of that. So they are losing 5.5% of all the value that is produced every year. They are losing that on the budget here. Now, this is not necessarily the biggest problem, or it hasn't been for a number of years now. I know this has been going downwards, but the interest rate has been very low. Now, the problem is that now the interest rate is going up, meaning that a debt of this size, where you're paying almost 0% in interest, is not that big of a problem. But if the interest rate goes up to 1, 2, or even 5%, this is going to be a massive problem. And if we look at here, we have the federal outlays, interest as percentage of GDP. So when the interest rate went up in the 80s here, you can see that the percentage interest rate as a percentage of GDP went up very rapidly here. And then it went down again and have been fairly low. So that only when you're seeing the GDP here, that is what the country produces, then what are they paying in interest on their debt? Well, they have only been paying around between 1 and 1.5%. But right now, that has begun to go up. And that is, of course, because the interest rates are going up. And as we're going to have a look at in a second, this can become very, very bad, very, very quickly if this situation escalates. Now, has this happened before, that the debt ceiling has been hit and there is a crisis? Yes, there have been a couple of times. One of them were back in 2011 when they hit the debt ceiling. And what basically happens at that point is that the United States, the government, the entire system cannot really pay their bills anymore, meaning that a lot of salaries to public employees couldn't be paid. And there was actually doubt, or a beginning doubt, that United States could be able, or that they wouldn't be able to pay off their debt. Now, what we should remember is that the US debt, the US treasuries, is the core foundation of the entire financial system in the world. I know it sounds big, and it is, because that is basically said to be the most secure paper in the world. If you loan some money to the United States, then you are basically 100% certain to get it back. Now, in 2011, all of a sudden, the S&P, the credit rating bureau, actually downgraded the United States economy from AAA, the best you can get, to AA+. Still excellent, but a down step from the outstanding. Now, what that means is that it got a little bit less secure to put your money into United States, meaning that when that insecurity creeps in, people want a larger interest on their loan to United States. Which again means, if we are going back to this one, that if we're going into a debt ceiling crisis now, where people are starting to questioning the US ability to pay off their debts, then the interest rate will go up. And that means that since the United States are owing a ton of money away, then this one as a percentage, the interest rate payment as a percentage of the GDP will also go up, meaning that United States will be a lot poorer country. It'll cost a really, really insane amount of money to the normal Americans. I've heard numbers between $3 and $5 trillion there will be less wealth in United States. it will probably have a huge impact on the job market and so on and so forth. So it will be a lot more expensive to be a normal American citizen. So that is quite insane what complications can come out of that. Now, are we going into a crisis with a debt ceiling? Well, right now we have the Democrats on the presidency, meaning Biden. We also have the Democrats ruling in the House, but we have the Republicans ruling in the Senate. And sorry, that was my mistake. That was, of course, the opposite. We have the Republican ruling in the House. That was how that is. Sorry for the mistake there. Now, if we look at what Republicans have said earlier, we can see here that back in 2019, when there was some doubt about the debt ceiling, and some of the Republicans thought that the Democrats would try to hijack the US economy and the world economy by using the debt ceiling as a kind of a leverage in some budget negotiations, Trump said that the government credit rating was sacred. He simply said that if you try to manipulate it so that you could get a better negotiating stand in the budget negotiations by using the credit rating and the debt ceiling as a kind of a leverage for that, then you were basically a traitor to your country. Now, what has happened since? Well, right now we have a bit of a peculiar system or setup in the House, because we have the Republicans in charge, with Kevin McCarthy in charge. However, there is the right wing of the Republican Party here, and they actually refused to vote for McCarthy in the beginning, being the Speaker of the House. Now, finally they did it, but they demanded some massive benefits for doing so, meaning that they can basically throw McCarthy out basically on a day's notice almost, if he doesn't comply with their demands. And right now they are saying, oh no, McCarthy, you are not letting Biden get this victory. You have to tell Biden that unless he complies with our demands for the budget, we are not going to raise the debt ceiling. And well, to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous, because these guys here, they're quite determined on not giving Biden a win. The question is, are they aware of the damage they can do to the US economy and to the world economy? And are they willing to pay that price to get some political gain? Biden, on the other hand, he knows that if he gives them the victory, if he allows the debt ceiling and the credit rating to become a thing you can use as a leverage in a negotiation, then that is a very slippery slope. That means that the next time maybe it's the opposite around, so the Democrats are in charge and we're having a Republican president. Well, the next time there's a debt ceiling that is hit, then the Democrats will do the exact same thing, and they will say to a Republican president and say, oh, guy here, you remember last time you did this to us? Now we're doing it to you, and this will be a really ugly situation. So what I am a bit afraid of is that these 15, 20 politicians here will basically rule and say to McCarthy, if you want to stay as a House of Speaker of the House, then you need to comply. You need to go to Biden and say, we want all our demands fulfilled, or we are sending the US economy into a tailspin. That is what I'm afraid of. There are not many days left for them to decide, and that is the peculiar situation that the United States are in right now. And sometimes when I'm debating politics, it's not often, but sometimes on Facebook and so on, I hear United States citizens say to me, why are you even giving this political argument? Because this is United States, you are seated in Denmark, why do you bother? And I said, well, because that what you decide right now, and we see that with all clarity, that what the United States decides right now can have really bad effects all over the world, and that means also on my investments. Now, what can we do? What should we invest in? Well, if we are looking at 2011, when there was the last time that was a really, really bad situation. There was something in 13 as well, but let's just have a look at 2011 here, which is one of the really bad debt ceiling crises. If we're looking at a product here called TLT, that is an ETF covering 20 plus year treasury bonds. If we have a look at what happened back in 2011, at the exact time where this was going on, that was over the summer. They were debating it, and we had this really bad debt ceiling crisis. And what happened to the bonds at that time? Even though the interest rate were to go up because of the debt ceiling crisis, and therefore you should think that bonds would be going down, but these long-term bonds were not. They were actually exploding in price by something like 30%. One of the reasons for that is that people were selling the short-term bonds. They were actually saying, we are very nervous about the United States and their economy in the short term, meaning months, maybe 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. However, we're not too concerned about the US economy over the next 20 to 30 years. So we will buy some more secure bonds further out in time. And that means that people sold out of all the short-term bonds and a lot of stocks, and they bought up in the longer-term bonds. I have been looking back on several instances where there was some sort of debt ceiling crisis, and every time we have seen actually a rise in the TLT. Also a little bit in the IEF, that is also one, but that is 7 to 10 year, and we can have a look at that at the same time back in 2011 here. We had the summertime here, and then we had the crisis that exploded. And as you can see, the IEF, that is a bit of a shorter term bond, they also went up, but not quite as much. So what I'm looking at right now, to be honest, is to take a somewhat of a little position of my portfolio into TLT. I have an algorithm running, choosing stocks and the risk on, risk off in the market, and that one actually went risk off, meaning that it went out of stocks and into TLT and IEF and a couple of other bonds. So what could happen if we're going to see a debt ceiling crisis is that we could see some sort of a rise in TLT, and you can consider that as a sort of a hedge, not with your entire portfolio, I guess, but at least some sort of hedge where we can see an opposite effect if the stock market starts to fall. So that is my suggestion, that you try to look into it. Remember, I cannot give you any advice on your economy. You have to decide for yourself. But if we are going to see these people here sending us into some sort of debt ceiling crisis, then it could be of a benefit to look at some TLT, maybe some IEF. Personally, I'm mostly into the TLT. If you're seated in Europe, you might be able to find an equivalent ETF here that covers the same as TLT and IEF. So that is my suggestion, that you have a look at that. And then let's cross our fingers that they get this mess solved, and we have enough crisis in the world right now with the war, with inflation, with interest rates. We don't need another one. So please, United States, get this fixed as quickly as possible so that we can get on solving some of the other crises. That's all for now. Take care of yourself and your money out there. I'll speak to you shortly. Bye.